Two aspects of the story jumped out at me, and you told me there was something amazing, but you wouldn't tell me what it was about a month or two ago. Remember having the conversation?
Yeah.
And you told me that there was something related to what was going on with production of the car and sales. Tell me what your story sort of breaks.
Well, you know, I mean, the Model S had come out in 2012.
Great fanfare.
Great reviews. Already had been named sort of Motor Trend Car of the Year. And you had all these early adopters that came in and bought the car. And then what sort of started to happen is that word of mouth wasn't that great. I mean, it had some glitches with the door handles, the windshield wipers, things like that. On the forums, people were giving it a hard time. And there were all these customers in line that they'd bought a spot in line to buy a Tesla, and they weren't following through with actual.
We got a timeline up on the screen. I want to go through that timeline real quick, because the timeline really starts to tell this story, right, of what you're describing. So the first thing that happens in the timeline, that goes on sale in the middle of the year. In November, it wins Motor Trend Car of the Year, and everyone's like, Tesla's great, Tesla's great. But the sales weren't happening. People put the money down, but it was a fully fundable deposit, as I recall, and the complaints happen. Cars start to catch on fire. They jack the price, and he goes to everyone in the company and says, we are in a crisis. I don't care what you think you do here. Your job is delivering cars.
Yeah, I mean, as I was told the story, you know, some of the executives have kind of held the severity of the situation from him a little bit, and then, you know, they come to him and they say, look, we're in a crisis state, and he takes people in HR and finance and engineering, and he says, get on the phone. Your job from now on is calling these customers and turning the pre-orders into sales. And
so about that word of mouth, I mean, you're telling me that everyone at the company was finding out that word of mouth was bad.
Well, yeah.
And yet, in Ernie's conference call, investors asked specifically about that, because you could see it in the online forums. You could see it if you talk to people. That some people love their Teslas, other people had some issues with them. And so let me read you what he said at the conference. His early optimism in the conference call. He says, on the conference call, two investors, the owners of the company, he says, there's nothing better than word of mouth, which has really been fantastic. It wasn't fantastic.
Well, yeah, it's funny. I mean, because you did have Motor Trend. You had these people who fell in love with Tesla. I mean, it's sort of like Apple. It has that cultish kind of thing. And then, so you have that group of people that are sort of celebrating the car. Then you had another group of people who, you know, had paid $100,000 for a car and expected everything to be, you know, understandably perfect, and started to grumble. And I think that started to catch up with the company.
So among the other things that were differing from what he was telling investors, and indeed in like the conference call where you're required to tell the truth, for example, the revival was kind of miraculous for this company. That among the things that started to happen, and even reading a story, I didn't quite understand what happened, that they shut down the factory. Well, first let's read this quote. If we don't deliver these cars, we are effed. So I don't care what your jobs you were doing, your new job is delivering cars.
Yeah.
But then this miraculous revival happens in the spring of 2013, where he shuts down the factory, which nobody knew happened. He certainly didn't tell investors he was shutting down the factory. They offered to sell the company for $6 billion, and all of a sudden there's a turnaround?
Well, you know, he'd gone to Larry Page just in case with this rescue plan and said, look, if we don't pick up sales, will you buy Tesla? And they had this handshake deal to do that. Then, you know, he puts all these workers into selling cars nonstop. And, you know, as I understand it, and the timeline does seem to work out on this, in the span of about 2 weeks, Tesla must have sold, you know, thousands of cars, ending up in that first profitable quarter, because you'll remember that quarter was a surprise, too. Even by Elon's optimistic standards, that was a blowout quarter. So.
And the reason, to me, that he said deliver cars rather than sell cars is because the sales were happening, but the deliveries were not being accepted. And until the delivery happens, they can't call it sold. At the same time, they started delivering cars if the customer would come to the factory.
Yeah.
So that meant they could recognize the revenue more quickly, because they didn't have to move a car to a person, they had to move a person to a building.
No, it's true. Well, and I mean, there's part of this is, you know, I mean, Elon plays this high-risk, high-stakes game. I mean, you can see this went right down to the wire. He sort of rolled the dice on this one, and it actually came out in Tesla's favor, but we could be talking about Tesla as a division of Google just as easily.
And you know, interesting also when he talks about reservations in that same conference call where he didn't let on that there were any problems, where he didn't tell the investors that the factory was shut. He also said that things were fine in terms of reservations, because I know that a lot of investors had figured this out. And they were putting these questions to him specifically in this forum so that he would try to tell the truth. And he said, that, let me read what he said about early demand. He said, quote, we have enough reservations right now to fill out the year. Literally, we could say goodbye to every store and every salesperson and still meet our 20,000 car target. You're saying that wasn't true. He was not only telling every salesperson they had to get cars delivered, but they had to tell every HR person and every factory worker and every person that needed more help. Not
well,
less.
I mean, it is sort of like you say, though. It's a linguistic game of sorts. I mean, there's the reservations, there's the pre-orders of people who are standing in line, and I think that number was huge. And then converting that to the sales was the tricky part.